2023, 850 billion yen, around 6 billion USD, was given to entrepreneurial startups in Japan. This is a tenfold increase over the past decade. Welcome to Gaijin Sake episode 4. Today we're going to be dealing with entrepreneurial culture in Japan. I know this sounds a little bit deep, but it's important for me to communicate and to run this podcast the way I think is interesting, and for those people around me who also find it interesting. One of the greatest opportunities I had here in Japan was the ability to attend one of their most prestigious top universities in Japan. And I'm going to tell you guys some stuff that's just going to sound like comedy. So when I was in Waseda, I did a master's program in international relations. At the time that I entered the university, the MBA program had just started, and it was housed under the Asian School of Pacific Studies and Gspod, right? And it was a very interesting, profound, and uniquely interesting cultural experience. Although I came in through the international relations program, because the MBA was housed in the same program at the same time. Now the MBA is its own independent program at Waseda University, but back then it wasn't. So we were able to take classes that counted towards my degree and the points that I needed to graduate with a master's in international relations, even though I was focusing on cultural anthropology and contemporary Japanese society and globalization, of how Japanese society imports culture, especially Brazilian culture. I was able to take about half the courses in the MBA program. I took strategic corporate strategy, leadership. What else did I take? I took marketing, advanced marketing, so many great classes, about half of my classes. And the teachers of the MBA program at Waseda at the time, I don't know now because I don't have so much connection anymore with the MBA program, but at the time, if I could tell you how impressive, how amazing these teachers were, it would be an understatement about how amazing they were. For example, I had the most influential class that has probably influenced me in my life was taught by Professor Higashide. He was a teacher of entrepreneurial theory in the MBA program at Waseda University. I believe he's still there. If I remember correctly, he graduated from the London School of Economics, and he was the first Japanese person to get a PhD in entrepreneurial theory from that university. His calm personality, his soft smile, housed such a high level of intelligence that sometimes it left me stunned. He would say things that would just shock us. And I think for me, it was even more profound because I was here for 10 years before I started. And before I even took that class, I was here for about 10 years. And when I was able to reflect on my professional time in Japan, working as an entrepreneur, because I came from the United States and I decided to start my own small business here, and capoeira teaching and Brazilian cultural teaching. The things that he taught us were so basic, so simple logic, that when you look back, you think, wow, how come everybody doesn't understand this so simply? But I guess that's the power of education. And one of the most important points that we talked about was entrepreneurial culture in Japan. And I will be honest with you, it's one of the most fascinating, interesting, and one of the few topics from the business world that I maintain constantly studying. I even have a course packet for how to do an entrepreneurial course for capoeira teachers and whatnot. But let's get into Japanese entrepreneurial theory. So I just told you guys, it has increased tenfold from the time before. When I first entered the entrepreneurial theory class and at Waseda University, the percentage of entrepreneurial startups in the early 2000s to mid 2000s of Japanese entrepreneurial startups was less than 0.02%. While at the time, in the early 2000s, in the United States, it was 12%. People will say, is it because of Asians are not as creative or not as outgoing or risk-taking as people in the United States? And we talked about this concept a lot, and I thought this was very interesting. First and foremost, creativity, entrepreneurial energy, entrepreneurial motivation, entrepreneurial culture is universal. It's not that Westerners are more creative than Asians. That's a topic for another thing. Creativity is a skill, just like language. And someone who has spoken 5 languages in their life, if you don't use it, you lose it. So really understanding that entrepreneurial culture, business culture, and all those things are kind of a creative skill that you do have to have. Basic understanding helps, but it's a cultural thing. And I want to talk today about why, in my opinion, most Japanese don't have this go-get-them attitude. And it reflects on 2 main points. One, I hope this changes, and this is something that I work constantly on with my own students here, especially young people. And sometimes I feel it's detrimental. It backfires because I'm teaching my young students, kids, how to think outside the box. And then they grow up and every aspect of Japanese culture hammers them back into the box. In Japan, we have this concept of we call it the wa. Wa is the stability of society. Nobody should say, everyone's heard the term, the nail that sticks out gets hammered back in. And this is something that I will constantly refer to because, in my opinion, the biggest, the most challenging obstacle for Japan to grow, to evolve, is Japanese culture to evolve, is the need for each person to have their own identity. Everyone here, and I saw it with my kids when they go to elementary school, when they go to preschool, when they go to junior high to high school, everything teaches them to conform to Japanese culture. And Japanese culture is so powerful. I had mentioned it in the other podcast, and a lot of foreigners, imagine it's just like a giant river that's really, the current is so strong, it's impossible to fight it. Once you get sucked in, you either flow or you get destroyed by the current. And this affects Japanese people more because they're born, raised, programmed to be inside of this thing. On the one hand, okay, I'm going to say this really quick. On the one hand, everything has good and bad. On the one hand, this incredible social pressure helps to keep society moving. And Japan is one of the safest countries in the world. Like I said, if you're an immigrant, if you come here and if you jump in the river and you flow with the river, you can find your space. I really think it's impossible for a foreigner to come here and not be able to do something. And we actually have it a little bit easier in some aspects because we're not expected to be 100% Japanese, but that's for another podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the entrepreneurial culture. So on the one hand, you have this culture that is incredibly powerful and focused on conformity. This has led to generational thinking that do not move outside of your box. For example, here, and I'll explain this, at a classmate in the master's program at Waseda, and I don't know him personally. He was just a classmate in my core class. And he went to Waseda preschool, Waseda elementary school, Waseda junior high, Waseda high school, Waseda college, and then he was in my program. And I think he must have been about 23. And I kept thinking to myself, how good of an example that is. And I was like, this guy's probably going to be a politician in the future or the director of a major university here, because Japan values stability. If you were born into a family that did a certain thing, it's still that way here. And it really affects entrepreneurial theory. And people don't realize it, but that's one of the reasons that there's so little innovation in Japan. Today, I don't want to talk about Japan in the 60s because that's a whole different time frame where there was a lot of backing from the United States. Japan had a very special situation. The bubble generation is very different than what it is for the last 20 years. And I thought to myself, for example, generally, if you ask anyone in Japan, when we speak in Japanese, oh, that person's a doctor, probably one of their parents was a doctor or one of their uncles or aunts was a doctor. Why? Because you kind of continue in the craft of the family. That's why nepotism here isn't a negative thing. Nepotism in Japan is considered a standard operating procedure. You'll never see somebody talk about nepotism in Japan because it's so accepted. And it's not a bad thing because life is about connections. Yeah, we have it everywhere else too. But here it's just understood that that's just part of life. And again, sometimes I just got to go with the logic of Japanese society in this situation. But at the same time, it takes away from entrepreneurial theory and entrepreneurial culture. The second part of that is that if you're not born into that, then you most likely won't be a part of that. The internet has opened a lot of avenues for a lot of people. But as I mentioned, my son does YouTubing and he started a new channel and everything. And it's hard. He said, I think that he had told me, this is him doing YouTubing professionally. He said, 90% of YouTubers don't make any money. The top 5% make money. The 5% after that make money from outside of YouTube, such as affiliate sales, the people who put links and people buy from that, or from sponsors of other things. For example, if you do a workout video and a company sponsors your video. So that has created opportunities for entrepreneurial thinking or entrepreneurial culture in Japan through the internet and social media. However, the numbers still don't add up, because here's what I'm going to talk about. And this is something that I hope people in Japan learn and reflect on. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I'm saying it's in every aspect of regular Japanese culture. And when I say regular Japanese culture, I'm talking about 80% of Japanese culture. Again, this is my opinion. This is from my research, my reflections and whatnot. Japanese culture, the language can be sometimes so self-defeating. And it's just normally accepted. In Japanese, for example, the words like, you better not try, muri shinaide, it's going to be too difficult, taihen so, you're going to fail, make so, it's impossible, dekinai. These are things that I've learned that when I talk to people at the general people who are trapped, not people who are trapped, but people who are trapped. I'm sorry, that's not a nice word to say, is trapped inside of that powerful river current. And I understand, because coming here as a foreigner, if you don't realize that powerful Japanese river current is taking you along, it's really easy, as I mentioned, for a lot of foreigners to survive here. But there's a lot of mental issues and stress and a lot of things that go along with that. If you check out the other podcasts I did, I can't remember if it was podcast 1, 2, or 3, but I talk about how long-term foreigners have a lot of stress here. This culture of defeatism, of just not trying, is so powerful here. And I was talking about this with my wife, and I hope that I can continue as a teacher here for over 25 years to give a spark, to give hope, to give a different view to my young students. But as I sit here and I think about this, think about how important it is to also understand how little Japanese culture has changed in 25 years. It's not that it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. It's just really what the situation is now. I hope that I can influence somebody or be a guide or be a mentor to young people here to look outside of what they're expected to do or expected to be, and be something greater. The greatest gift that I can give somebody as a long-term Gaijin here in Japan is the gift of an alternate view of something outside of what they're used to. It's not easy, and a lot of times I see young students that I taught grow up to be ultra conformist, but at the same time, I've also seen young people I influenced here grow up and be a little bit more happy. Japan, the culture, the power of the Japanese cultural situation sometimes makes it really difficult for people to be here. Japanese men have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. It's a very important mental health issue. I do everything I can to create a good community here and to give people a sense of acceptance, belonging outside of the pressures of everyday Japanese society. Like I said, not every aspect of Japanese culture or any culture is bad. You have good and bad. But here on Gaijin Sake, it's important that we share and talk about these topics to add to the conversation, to build. It's always a pleasure. It's always an honor to be able to talk about this and to be part of Japan and my life here. This recording, also one thing, just guys, if you're checking this out on YouTube, check out my Patreon, Mastery Vibes, where you see everything I do in Japan. Don't forget to subscribe, share, comment. Let's help the channel grow. This podcast will more and more be, I'm using CapCut to do the subtitles because I want to make this available to people who don't speak English, especially to the Japanese community, because it's so important for me to do my best here, because I am a permanent fixture to Japanese landscape, to Tokyo. As I said always, I'm here to stay. I'm here to do my best. Guys, today's topic about entrepreneurial theory is so fascinating, and I'm sure I'll come up with more insights in the future. If we can get past that self-defeatism and understanding that just because you're born into a situation doesn't mean you have to stay in it, then maybe we can tap into that vibrant sector of Japanese people who for the next generation will grow. If you're a parent in Japan, I recommend that you learn to speak positively to the kids. I see so many parents who, when I talk to them about their kids, they say they're very cute. But when you talk, everything is just going through the hoops of being Japanese. Go to the cram schools, go to the after school schools, be part of this club, be part of that. But what about growing healthy, independent, and entrepreneurial kids? I hope that I've been a good influence on my kids, and I hope to be a good influence on everyone around me. Thank you for joining me today on Gaijin Sake. Like I said, so many things are going to be getting wild and crazy here. But together, let's explore Japanese culture. Arigatou gozaimashita. Mata kondo ne.